Hey everyone, welcome to day 8 of the Tour de Fleece, and in today's update I am going to be doing some spinning. So this is the Gulf Coast native that I've been spinning for the last couple of days, and yesterday I finished the first bobbin with about 93 grams. This is the start of bobbin 2, and the goal is to have 3 total bobbins, each weighing about 93 grams, so that I can make a traditional 3-ply. Now, because there's a lot of time for us to sit, spin, and think, or maybe catch up on TV shows or listen to some podcasts, this has given me an opportunity to kind of bring forward or foreground some of the thoughts that have been kicking around in the back of my head. And one of them is the slow craft movement, the hashtag slow craft, because I have a general sense of what this means, but it's actually more complex as you break it down. And so I kind of wanted to just briefly touch on some of the things relating to slow craft. Obviously, making stuff by hand is going to be slower than making them by machine, but we're also using tools. So here I'm spinning with a wheel, and that's one version of slow craft in comparison to what a machine is doing. But then there's also spinning by spindle, and that's more likely going to be slightly slower than wheel spun, though not entirely. And then there's also thigh spinning or splicing, like I posted in a previous video tutorial on my channel. That's another version of slow craft, but arguably they are much slower. So since I am going to be doing a lot of this spinning, I thought this might be fun to watch me work on this other type of slow craft, hand weaving. And there are lots of different types of looms. So what I'm using here is a rigid heddle loom, and I have it set up. I showed a little bit of the setup for this in a previous episode. And now that the warp has been completely wound on, and I've got everything perfectly tensioned, I'm starting the actual weaving process. But this has kind of led me to think more about the slow craft idea. So there are lots of different ways to weave, obviously. This is a rigid heddle loom, so this is a type of weaving mechanism, using rigid heddle to move the warps up and down. And with a rigid heddle, you will often use the heddle bar itself as a shed beater. Now, there are floor looms that have multiple shafts, so not just the up and down here that you can see, but 4, 8 or more. And the types of heddles also vary. So are they really the same thing? Well, in a technical sense, I think so, because they're both being manipulated by hand or feet. It's not mechanized by machine, but by human. And so it is what I would consider slow craft. However, is it the same slow craft as if you were to weave with string heddles? Because it usually requires a lot more knowledge to get everything set up and to operate the loom. And as I have shown with warp-weighted loom weaving, there is a lot of expertise placed on the weaver rather than the tool. And so I feel like in that case, it might be considered a more extreme version of slow craft. Now, specifically in this video, I am using a rigid heddle loom, but rather than using the heddle itself as a shed beater, I'm using a shuttle that has nothing on it as my beater. Now, I'm not doing this to be overly complicated. I knew that when I was setting this project up, because I was using very fine yarns and silk, I wanted to make sure that I didn't braid the yarns too much. So rather than use the rigid heddle as the beater, I am using the shuttle so that I don't cause as much abrasion on these warp yarns. And also I'm dealing with 2 different types of tension. or rather 3 types of tension, because I am using wool, alpaca, and pure silk. Now the pure silk is not going to have any give. Therefore, when I am tensioning my warps, I have to keep in mind that the silk isn't going to stretch. So as I move through the project, I have to make sure that I'm not putting too much stress on those particular threads. But also, I need to make sure that I'm not causing any extra pulling or puckering, because what will happen is there will be a springy effect, and my wool will sort of act like an elastic band. So it will stretch out, and then without the tension it's going to release, but the silk won't have that same response. So what could happen is the silk might get really wiggly looking, which could be cool, but I don't really want that effect. So I'm moving very, very carefully here, very deliberately. And to avoid abrasion on the warp, I am making sure that every single shed is changed before I bead it, and I'm beading it with the shuttle there. But I'm making sure that I go slowly so that I don't get any snags as the warp is as the weft is being pushed along the warp. So it's a very slow and deliberate process, but it's all with this view to not ruin the warp. And yeah, so I would say that this is definitely a slow craft thing, but is it the same as if I were to use the rigid heddle as the beater? Yes, but I think this also kind of hints at the relative complexity hidden behind the term. And my question to you is, have you thought about the word slow craft, or the movement in general, to go more towards slow craft in this sort of way? And the reason why I ask this is because I like to define and understand the words that I'm using as much as possible. So I recently learned the word stash is not necessarily a great word to use in reference to your yarn or your wool because of its drug connotation. It's a little bit triggering for some people, which is fine to know. But slow craft, I feel, is a very complex phrase, and there's a lot of meaning behind it. And I'm curious to see what others have to say about what slow craft means to them, and whether it's the same as mine or different or more broad or more narrow compared to my understanding. So please post that in the comments below. Now, it might be a little difficult to see in these shots, but I hope that you can see that the silk yarn is a little thicker than the other yarns, so I'm getting some really nice visible texture. But also those silk yarns have a lot more tension, so I'm being mindful of those parts so that I don't have any further issues with breaking warps, because I don't have anything to replace them. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if I have given some food for thought, please post that in the comments below. I will see you tomorrow for day 9. Happy spinning, everyone! Bye!